For Creamer Media's Polity, Thami Madiba, advisor to Minister Lindiwe Sisulu and author Thami Plaatjie, joins me to discuss his book titled Sobukwe, The Making of a Pan-Africanist Leader. Tell us briefly about Robert Sobukwe's early life and how he got involved in the struggle against apartheid.
Well, it's a tall order. Sobukwe was born on the 5th of December in a small town of the Eastern Cape called Grafrenet. That's where he was inspired by missionary education, he was inspired by religion, and he was inspired by the intellectual environment that prevailed in that part of the world. He could speak Afrikaans very fluently. In fact, he could even deliver an impromptu sermon in Afrikaans. He could speak Xhosa fluently. His father was good at that. His mother was a storyteller. So it is the normal life of any other young person. But when he grew up, the deep religious convictions of Christianity, of fairness, compassion, humanity greatly had an impact in his life. And when he saw apartheid and he saw oppression, he rose to the occasion because of the extent to which he detested oppression.
You believe that Sobukwe was silenced beyond the grave. Why do you think this, and do you hope to shed more light on his life and contribution with this book?
I think the fact that the Sobukwe's voice, for instance, has been expunged from his history documents. Sobukwe died 28th of February 1978. Even to date, we don't have his voice. This is a man who appeared in court because he was a lawyer when he died. This is a man who gave speeches in public. This is a man who has been receiving delegations of government that recorded his talks when he was on Robben Island. So it is very funny that to date we don't have his voice. Number two, other leaders have spoken about Mandela, Chris Hani, Oliver Tambo. Rarely do we speak about Sobukwe. And his greatness is almost equal. And some people are saying even far more than that of other leaders. Remember, this is the only leader in human history around whom an act of parliament was proclaimed called Sobukwe Clause. The only human being to be sentenced to prison in Robben Island by parliament, not by a court of law. So he was distinguished in so many ways: a lecturer at Wits, an intellectual, a Christian, a devout Christian, for that matter. And inspired many people, including Steve Biko, were inspired by Sobukwe. Why are we not hearing Sobukwe's voice? Why are we not being told about Sobukwe? Why is he not in the history books? Why is he not in the popular imagination? Some few streets are now being named after him in Cape Town and Johannesburg, but we could do more.
Tell us more about Robert Sobukwe's intellectual fortitude, which you came to admire.
Well, I think he was a towering intellectual. I refer to a number of cases when he was a student, how he won English essay competitions by virtue of his prodigious mind, and how he bedazzled some of his lecturers at Fort Hare University and Hilltown, who admired the magnitude of his intellectual depth. Here's a young man coming from nowhere, but he towered above many people. At Fort Hare, passed with distinction. In fact, when he finished his BA degree, he wrote a letter of protest because he did not get a distinction in one of his subjects. He was convinced that he was entitled to a distinction, or he deserved a distinction for that matter, and he wrote a long letter to the professor to say, give me reasons why you didn't give me a distinction, but I think I was aptly qualified for such.
And the surname Sobukwe was adopted by the family. Tell us more about that.
The original surname of the Sobukwe is Rabokwe from the interviews that I've gathered. And the Sobukwes originally come from Lesotho in a place called Kuting. Because of the migration, because of Mfecane, the wars of dispossession in the last 2 centuries, there was a lot of dispersals. Some people left, some went to Zimbabwe with the Cecil John Rhodes. So it was an era of turmoil and displacement of many communities. That is why the Rabokwes ended finding themselves in the Eastern Cape, where they started working the dam construction. His father was an artisan there, and they settled there, and the Xhosas, because they could not announce or pronounce the name, they adulterated it and they call it Sobukwe.
There is a well-known biography on Robert Sobukwe by Benjamin Pokrant, and he spent time with Sobukwe and his family. What makes your book different?
Well, it's written from a South African perspective, or an African perspective. It's one of the first books by an African person. I understand Sobukwe from his African background. I speak about his culture, I speak about his language, I speak about the idiom of his people. I speak about his heritage, I speak about his political thought, I speak about his totems. Remember, African people venerate a number of totems. Sobukwe's totem was the baboon. I speak about the meaning of a baboon in the life of Sobukwe. Mandela's totem is the great-grandfather Madiba, who founded the clan. But I also understand him from a Pan-Africanist perspective. that Sobukwe, much as he was an intellectual, he was a religious person, a loving husband for his wife and a caring father for his children, but he was a Pan-Africanist. He admired Africa. He had a vision for the United States of Africa. He said, one day I envision a situation where we are going to enter the golden gates of a new nation called the United States of Africa, where Africa will be united, Africa will speak one language, Africa will have one foreign currency, one foreign affairs, one defense force, and the beauty and the wealth of Africa will be used for the benefit of the people of Africa. So he followed closely in the footsteps of Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, and all those Pan-Africanist leaders.
And Sobukwe joined the African National Congress Youth League, but he and his classmates were first skeptical about the ANC Youth League because they felt that it had been compromised by its continuing participation in the Native Representative Council and the Township Advisory Board. So can you talk to us more about Sobukwe's involvement in the Youth League?
Sobukwe was non-political. Sobukwe was just a distinguished intellectual, a thinker and a towering writer. But then he took time to get involved in politics. He admired the unity movement as politics of non-collaboration, and was very skeptical about the ANC and the ANC's involvement, especially, as you said, in the Native Representative Council. For the section old guard of the ANC felt that it was necessary for the ANC to work from within the system, to work with government, to work with the structures of government, and Sobukwe did not accept that. It was only when AP Mda, the leader of the ANC Youth League, came to Fort Hare and pronounced on a new ideology called African nationalism, which Sobukwe took to a higher level, calling it Pan-Africanism. It was when Sobukwe was now excited that in the ANC there's a new trend which was represented by the emergence young people, namely AP Mda, Limbede, and many others. And Sobukwe readily availed himself and joined the ANC Youth League. It was somewhere around March 1949.
And earlier this year, during a dialogue celebrating the Rivonia trialist, SACP Deputy General Secretary Solima Baila claimed that the anti-apartheid struggle, Sobukwe was treated as the only political prisoner on Robert Island, while others were regarded as terrorists, which he later retracted and apologized for. What is your view on Mapaila's comments?
I think it's an exemplification or a manifestation of lack of knowledge, especially at such high levels of the leadership of the ilk of Mapaila. The fact that he withdrew is something that we accepted, but the fact that he made such a frivolous statement, which I regarded is an insult to the caliber of Sobukwe. I mean, here is a man who was kept in Robben Island cell for 6 years. He could not talk to anybody. Whilst the Mandelas and others, even the leaders of the PAC, Mutuping and others, were kept in cells where they were staying with 4, 5, 10 people. They could have conversations with those people. Sobukwe within Robben Island was isolated and stayed alone for 6 years. How can you say that man was treated better than any other person? I mean, it's just a flagrant disregard of simple facts, but it also speaks to the fact that people do not read, people do not acquire knowledge and understand things from what they are.
Mm-hmm. And do you think enough has been done to honor Sobukwe for the role he played against apartheid?
Not at all. In fact, Sobukwe has been relegated to the margins of history. Sobukwe must be put in the center. The intention of the book is to create knowledge and to create awareness around a towering figure, around a man of great fortitude, around a man who must inspire generations, around a man who cared and loved his country and who sacrificed. Remember, Sobukwe was a lecturer at Wits University. Sobukwe just passed his BA degree, just passed his honors degree, about to enroll for a master's degree, invited by Rhodes University to come and lecture. So he could have had a sterling career as a scholar. His wife was a nurse. By all accounts, was a middle class. But then he was able to forgo all of those privileges and to side with the people and to lead them in Sharpeville. That is why we have what is known Sharpeville shooting, the 21st of March. Sobukwe sacrificed. He said leaders must be in front. And when he was arrested, he says, no, we're not going to apply for bail. He said Africans must fill those prisons. Africans must fill those jails and create a situation of ungovernability. That is why apartheid became the first topic in the United Nations. Apartheid became isolated. The massacre of Sharpeville put the spotlight on South African politics and oppression, all thanks to Sobukwe, who today is a forgotten character.
And lastly, this book is said to be the first of 4 volumes that will be published on Sobukwe. What can we expect from the other books yet to come?
The first volume speaks to Sobukwe's birth, history of his birth until the formation of the PAC on the 6th of April 1959. Remember, they chose the date 6th of April because it was a date of the arrival of the Afrikaner people, or the Dutch, in 1652 on the 6th of April, 6:30 in the morning. It ends there. So the second volume will be from 1959 until the death of Sobukwe, which is 1978. That is the second volume. It will speak to the formation of the PAC. Sobukwe is going to Sharpeville massacre, Robben Island experience, coming back, detained and banished in Kimberley. Sobukwe becoming a lawyer because he acquired about 5 degrees, was in prison. The third volume is going to speak to his writings. The collection of his writings, letters and thoughts, speeches, and his deputation in court. He was the first person, for instance, who said in court is not going to plead because he did not understand, he did not recognize the system that kept him in prison. The last volume is going to be the interpretation of his thoughts. We're going to try to link Sobukwe to the broader body politic of Pan-Africanism, from Marcus Garvey, George Patmore, Haile Selassie, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, and all other great intellectual thinkers who preceded Sobukwe in the realm of the political thoughts called Pan-Africanism.
Thank you, Thami.
Thank you very much.
That was Thami Plaatjie speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about Sobukwe, the making of a Pan-Africanist leader.